Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Toby Eunice of a Gypsy Kiss. Stick with us for a couple of seconds, and we've got a great panel coming up for you. Thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a great panel tonight. We have not only great panelists, but a great guest in Richard McDonald, Illinois Ghost, in the forums. We're going to talk about Warm Waters Halt. But before I do that, I'd like to have each of the panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their properties and assets on the internet, so they can refer you to their websites, their blogs, and their YouTube channels as well. Sean, let's start with you.
Good evening, everybody. Sean Dotson here, otherwise known as Sean NM of The Flip Side.
Thanks. And Pam?
I'm Pam Shotman, and I'm Ramblin' Pam on YouTube.
And Shelley?
I'm Shelley Carney with a Gypsy's Kiss, and I'm also with thesofterside.me.
Thank you. And Mike?
Mike Calazars on YouTube. Glad to be here. Glad to meet Pam and Rick, kind of in person.
So before I introduce Rick, I'd like for him to introduce himself, tell us about whatever assets he has on the internet, and then give us a little background and let us know how he became a Fenn treasure hunter, and maybe a little bit about how many times he's been out, and then we've got some questions for him.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Rick McDonald, Illinois Ghost. I've been searching about almost 7 years now, since June 2011. I have a blog. It's Ghost Adventures. It's at illinoisghost.wordpress.com.
And how many searches, how many recons have you gone out, and how many times have they been from Illinois?
Well, all of them's been from Illinois. Actually, I've got 100. My next one will be 110 trips, but each trip I stay for 4 days to a week. So the searches I'm not really sure about, because each day I go out that I'm there.
And of course, that's you're up there with numbers like Dale and Cynthia. What is it that you feel like you've learned, or what do you learn each time? What's your strategy every time you go out?
Well, every time I go out, I try to get as many pictures as I can so I can recon my next trip and plan, my next destination when I get there. I pretty much go to the same spot anymore. When I first started out, I bounced around like a lot of people do, trying to hunt for what I thought was the right place. But once I got what I thought was the right place, I just stay at it, keep, going right to it every time.
So there is, as this year has evolved, I've noticed there's a lot of conversation about whether or not this is one big hoax and that Fenn has created a marketing fraud. Now, I don't believe any of that, but I was wondering, when people say, or when you read, or when you hear things like that, what is your response internally and externally?
Well, honestly, I don't believe it's a hoax. I think he hid it. I think he's honest about hiding it, and I don't think he makes any money from it. I actually believe that it's going to the money's going to who he says it does. Mm-hmm. I get tons of emails. I'm sure you guys do too, running your own blogs and YouTubes, but people thinking that I'm actually Forrest, and I keep telling them I'm not. And the emails I forward on to Forrest, but it's so many, I don't want to annoy him all the time. So most of the time I just end up deleting most of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do on occasion either get an email that gives you the impression they think we're Forrest Fenn, or that we have direct communications with him. And let's talk about that, because you brought it up in another forum this week. I've mentioned in the past that it is rare that I hear from Forrest, in terms of responding to my emails. And other people have said that he's at a point in the evolution of this that he's not answering a lot of emails. But you said you had a call with him.
Oh, yeah. It was when I was searching. He, one time he told me, hey, when you're around, because one time I went and he said, we'll get coffee. But he had something going on. He was out up towards Taos or something that day, doing something, setting up for Today's Show or something. So that last time I was out there this trip, I called him before to see if he was available, but then he had told me that Peggy was sick. I didn't want to show up unannounced. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I seen he's had a lot of problems with that, people getting arrested and not showing up unannounced. So,
And did he give any indication of how Peggy was doing then or how she's doing now?
well, I don't know if she's like, I don't think she's like deathbed sick. I
Yeah,
just think
yeah.
she's like sick. He says his daughter's there helping him take care of her, and
Oh, well,
and
good.
so I didn't want to be a burden either. So I just, I thanked him for, talking to me and told him that, maybe some other time on one of my other trips. So,
All right, well, we can all hope that she gets better soon. Sean, why don't you start the questioning on your side?
Sure. Rick, good to finally meet you. We've kind of chatted a little bit back and forth on the forums and stuff, so it's good to finally get to talk with you. But one of the questions I've had is lately I've seen a lot of talk on some of the forums a lot about those searchers that have multiple searches, above so many numbers that there's somewhat of a kind of a negative connotation towards that. But one of the things really that I'd like to hit on is something that Jeremy P. over on Dal Neitzel's site put a good, little discussion about how to defray the costs and make things on the cheap. So with as many searches as you had and coming as far as away, do you have any kind of tips to searchers out there to kind of help defray costs or keep things down? I mean, with as many searches as you had, and you don't live in kind of the search zone like some of us do, but what can you tell us about that?
right. I have 2,200 miles round trip each time I go. It's 17 hours each way.
Yeah.
So usually when I go, I don't get a whole lot of search time anyway. It's straight there, deadhead straight through, and I'm searching. A lot of times I sleep on the ground, bivy bag, something like that, or I'll sleep in the back of the car. My family goes, or my daughters, or anybody, I'll get rooms. But that's about the only time I ever do the expense of getting rooms. And my expenses are up there. I think, I don't even want to. I'd say close to 70,000 anyway. And I burned up 4 vehicles doing it so far. So that's hard mileage on a vehicle, just deadheading there, deadheading back, and not nonstop, just fueling on the road.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, like you were talking about people with multiple searches. I think they're referring to, like, they believe, well, if you ain't found it by now in the spot you're going to, that you must have the wrong spot. But I don't feel that I got the wrong spot. I'm pretty much like everybody else. I believe I'm at least searching the right place.
Yeah, Forrest has mentioned a lot about avid searchers and intrepid searchers. I think that might be something to people who really go out there and stick to it, and have the fortitude and everything to stick to a solve. So,
well, my biggest problem is trying to figure out how it's hidden. Is it hidden above ground? Is it buried? If it's buried, man, you could be searching your front yard and, take years to find it.
Yeah.
If it's buried. And then, I heard that there's a certain type of cloth that you can wrap around metal and you can't detect it. It won't be metal detectable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what it was called, but he keeps bringing up like the word cover and everything. I'm like, man, I hope he didn't do that, because my metal detector's useless then.
So, Sean, you've been out on a number of searches as well. How have you worked to bring down your expenses?
Kind of like Rick says, I have no shame in throwing a bedroll in the back of my pickup and sleeping back there. Packing bologna sandwiches, going on the cheap, staying where I can. Again, I'm pretty fortunate that I live close to the southern part of the search area, that I can do it a little bit cheaper than having to drive, 1,100 miles or 1,700 miles one way, like Rick's got to do. So yeah, it's just about watching your costs, and planning ahead. And I'm fortunate that I have an occupation that allows me travel all within the search state. So when I'm in areas based on my job and I have extra time, I'll go out and search as well. Mm-hmm. So I have that I am a bit fortunate in that area.
Some of those expenses are supported by your company because you just happen to be in that location for your employer. And Pam, I know, of course, you have the Class A vehicle you tow along your Jeep, and that in and of itself is not always inexpensive, but how do you guys work to, reduce the expense of searching?
Sometimes we don't take the Class A. Sometimes we have a full-size truck that we will take, and we'll just find hotels along the way, and sometimes that's cheaper because the gas mileage is not real great. But we do have to plan ahead, like Sean said and Rick said, you plan ahead, and because we are retired, we have the time, but we still have to plan ahead, and we live all the way in California,
Right.
so it takes us a couple of days to get there, or at least a couple of days to get where we're going to go. So,
Well, I'll come back to you in just a second with a question, but Mike, you have a question for Rick.
Well, as the only member of the panel who's never been boots on the ground to look, I mean, 100 searches, that kind of boggles my mind a little bit. I was just wondering, do you think have you always stayed in the same general area? Are you in the same state? I guess I can ask you that. Or have you moved around?
I've never left New Mexico. I think it's in New Mexico. I can't see him putting it anyplace else. I think all the Yellowstone talk, I think that's just mirroring the actual hiding place.
So do you agree with warm waters being the New Mexico fishing regulation, or do you have a different warm waters?
I believe that the whole poem, like warm water salt, I believe it's pretty much straightforward. I believe it's actually a spot where the warm waters, run into cold water, or they actually come to a stop.
Very nice. And Mike, I know you and I exchanged a number of emails on that topic today. So I want to make sure you get all those questions out. But Shelley's got her hand up there for a question from the chat room. Let me take that, and then I'll come back to you in just a little bit because I want you to follow up on that question, please. Shelley?
Oh, okay. Well, while I have the microphone, let me just say we have a couple of new people tonight. Jeff Mann and Doe Vend. Our moderators tonight are Joel Lewicki, Brian Eagle, Man in the Barn, Jimmy Fast, and Jason Eunice is in the house.
Well, we got the full
complement.
Full complement
Yes.
of.
So thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here. A little applause for you guys. And we have a super chat from JL, and here is Jay's question. And it's written to AGK. Do you think Cynthia's view of New Mexico has changed since your newfound info on where warm waters halt?
So let me answer that question real quick so that we can get back to Rick. I don't believe it has. And the reason I don't believe it has is because I don't think Cynthia ever, she was like Rick. She didn't have the same fishing regulations perspective of warm waters halt as I did. And since basically, although I've changed locations, I haven't changed the idea of the regs yet. So I imagine she's just as adamant about spending the summer in Yellowstone as she is here. So, Pam, I never gave you a chance to ask Richard your first question.
I was going to ask, I saw that on your website that it looks like you found quite a few little treasures out there on your searches already. I like the pictures you put on there. Do you always take your metal detector with you when you go out on searches?
I always have it in the car. I used to have a lot better one. I used to have a Garrett AT Gold, but I actually sold it to go on another trip.
Mm-hmm.
I've sold a drone to go back on another trip, just so I could turn around, deadhead straight back, because I've gotten home and turned around, went back. But yeah.
But then did you buy another drone?
I got the Phantom 3 and a Phantom 4.
Very nice.
On my Phantom 3, I actually put the modified antennas on it. It's supposed to give you more range, but I haven't gotten more range out of that one. That's the one I don't worry about losing. If I stick it up and it flies away, I don't worry about it. So.
Since, the Phantom 4 is a bigger loss. A bigger loss. I want to go back and address that issue of expense, because I think a couple of the panelists made an important point, and that is sometimes it's not the expense, sometimes it's the planning. Basically, Shelley, the team that we have, Shelley, her husband Kevin, and myself, we can afford, because of where we are in life, to make 3, maybe 4 trips a season. And so each of them has to be very carefully planned, not only from a financial perspective, but from getting Kevin off work and working our schedule. So I think sometimes the planning that you do is far more important than whether or not it's a financial issue. I mean, if you can make 107 trips, that's not just good financial management. That's also very good planning. So I'm impressed with that. I don't know how many years it would take us to get to that many trips. And, you know, like Cynthia did, we're going to stay in New Mexico as long as we can, simply because although it requires planning, it requires less planning, and it's certainly less of an investment. So
my biggest problem with that is going through the jobs. They don't like when you're gone all that much. I've gone through a few, yeah.
So are you self-employed or employed by someone, and how flexible are they for you?
Well, right now I haven't been working because of that second surgery I had. I had 3 surgeries right there in a row since April of last year. I had that first one, and then I had that gallbladder attack right at like 3 weeks after that. And I didn't think I was going to get out and search, but heck, 3 days after I had that gallbladder surgery, I had boots on the ground again, and then my neck went out again. So now I'm back having that neck surgery again. What else was the actual question there?
Well, I wanted to know how your employer, unless you're self-employed, deals with the time that you take off.
Well, most of the time it's just I'll wait for my days off. I'll try and get my days off put back to back when on certain jobs I had. Like, I worked at the sheriff's office for quite a while as a deputy there, and worked in like courthouse bailiff, and I worked as a correctional officer. I had a job driving a bus. I've taken a job just at a couple of gas stations that paid weekly, just so that I could have weekly money, and they'd work with my trips and stuff, my time off that I like to get.
Shelley,
like I said,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I bet it's at least 8 jobs here just since I've been searching that I've went through.
Mike, let's go back to your question, that Q&A that you were doing regarding Warm Water's Halt, and then I'll go to Shelley and back up to the other panelists.
Well, after hearing the multiple jobs, have you considered moving to New Mexico?
That's what we're getting ready to do now.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
I still got a brother that lives in Bullhead City there, so actually that's where we're thinking about moving, because then pretty much a day's drive, and I could be there and then be back the next morning if I had to. I'd do a roundabout trip.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So back to warm waters real quick. So you said you think it's physically where warm water runs into cold. Are you going to different locations in New Mexico, or do you have the same Warm Waters Halt and you're just in that general area?
I used to go to different places. I've been up to Cimarron, up by Taos, but anything saying, hey, this is where you got to go. When I found out what I believe tells me, hey, this is where you're supposed to be going, I go to the same spot every time. It's the same Warm Waters Halt. I just keep working my clues. I feel that I'm on the last one. I'm at that look quickly down, and I'm going in circles. I can't figure out what exactly is going on there.
So you think you found the blaze?
I'm pretty sure I have. Yeah, I'm confident I have. Forrest knows my entire. I've told him everything. He knows everything that I do. He knows everything that I'm going to go look at each time.
That's very cool. That's very cool that you have that kind of conversational relationship with him. Shelley, I see your hand raised.
Yes, we have another super chat.
Very nice. Thank you.
And it's $100 from Paul Ammons. He just wanted to make a statement that brown is brown trout. And then we have a question from Eric Schmidt, and it's for Rick. Rick, can you give us some idea of a general location of where you are searching?
Pecos Wilderness, I believe. Every trip I do is in the Pecos.
Good area.
We have a question from Deborah Jensen. Didn't Forrest Fenn say the chest is wet? What could that really mean?
Sean Dodson, do you want to take that? Who wants to take that? Sean Dodson.
Sorry, can you say the question again, Shelley? I was thinking about the Pecos and how much I love that area as well.
Yeah, me too.
Deborah Jensen says, didn't Forrest Fenn say the chest is wet? What could he really mean?
Well, for me, anywhere in the Rocky Mountains, any kind of metal is going to be wet, and it has to do with, like you said, physics, which talks about relative humidity. And any kind of relative humidity in the Rockies above 5,000 feet and below 10,200, any kind of metal in the morning is going to have some kind of precipitation. Is going to you're going to get frost or any kind of dew on that based on the relative humidity. So that's, to me, that's what I believe he means by wet. He said after we lost Paris that, the treasure is not underwater. Now, of course, there's that whole complete argument that doesn't mean it's not in water. And I'm not going to go there. We've already discussed that, I think, at length. So I think it really has to do with relative humidity, that the treasure chest could be wet. And that could be if it's 6 inches, a foot underground, or sitting on top of a rock somewhere. That's my answer.
Rick, what do you think when it comes to the Fenn saying the chest was wet?
Well, I have my own theory on it. I don't believe he's talking about water, but I don't think he's actually saying that the chest physically has water on it.
Mike, have you thought about that one?
Yeah, on one of my Forrest Fenn Says What blogs, I actually emailed Forrest the question, and he emailed me back. And I don't remember what blog number it is. And I'm going to paraphrase because I'm probably not going to get it right. But I thought he said it would have been due to rain. Now, does that mean that the chest isn't actually covered? If it's in the ground somehow, I mean, rain does seep through the ground. But if you go through the Forrest Fenn Says What blogs, I did email him. He did send an answer.
Pam, and I thought you had a YouTube video on this particular topic. Did I miss that? What do you think?
As far as
The treasure, Fenn saying that the treasure
wet.
chest is wet. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's in water. I think that I agree with the other people that it's probably like from weather or something like that, that it's wet from that. I don't believe that he put it underwater.
Right, to make it that much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I
Pam,
think,
go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I think you also have to think about long-term erosion as well. And we were talking about, Mike had mentioned something about rain and then seeping down into the treasure chest, and that's very likely. But you've got to look at, if he really was thinking, about everything and thinking long-term, 100 years, 1,000 years in the future, he really had to consider long-term erosion. And it being, in a creek or in very, very close proximity to a river, you've got to think about the long-term effects. And you've even said over the next 1,000 years, the geology is going to change and may make it more difficult to find the treasure. But so you really, when you're looking at the place that you think the treasure chest may reside, you really got to think about long-term, erosion, and how is that treasure chest wet? So just something to think about.
Pam, let's go back to you. Do you have another question for Rick?
I was going to ask him if he has plans for Search 110 yet.
Yeah, I'm working on it now. That's what I was trying to work on tonight. I was trying to catch up on my blog a little bit. I haven't done so much on it forever.
Does your daughter go with you very often?
She's gone. I've had two of my daughters go. Each one has been about 3 times. My grandkids have gone a couple times. One of my grandkids found a geocache that was, hidden under a rock, and man, neither one of us saw it, but she found it. And we were surprised. And we put a little something in it and just signed it. And so, yeah, if you ever find it, I'd put a compass in it.
Shelley, I see your hand raised.
Yes, I have a question from Julie Smith for the panel. What is your current most promising lead?
Let's start with you, Rick. You're the guest.
What is my current most promising lead? Well, I've never been shy about saying it, but I actually think I found a map. That's what I've been working. I think the poems are the instructions to the map, and that's what I've been following past 2 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Mike, your most promising lead.
Well, you really got me thinking with the New Mexico fishing regulation. I'm still going back and forth on if I think that's it or not. And mostly for me, it comes down to the specialized knowledge that Forrest has said. I know what you think about that.
Yeah.
But when we have a minute to talk about the different warm waters, I'll kind of go through a couple things I printed out.
Yeah, we're
for me,
gonna start that up here in just a minute, but I want to get all the questions out. Go ahead.
Yeah, and for me, it's where warm waters halt is the most important clue and the hardest. So that's what we need to be focused on. The Glacier National Park, I don't know, maybe it's a stretch. But I'm really going to focus in and probably do some vlogs on the New Mexico fishing regulations.
Yeah. Pam, your most promising lead?
Promising lead as far as location right now?
Well, your most promising lead for any part of that poem, I imagine.
Right now, it would be elimination for me. We have 2 trips that we have planned over the summer. One is the Colorado, New Mexico area, and the other one would be up by Montana and Wyoming. So we're just in the process of elimination still.
Right. Sean, your most promising lead?
I keep following this SUV with Illinois plates around here that keeps running around the Pecos. I don't know who that guy is.
Follow him, huh?
Yeah,
I had to quit driving that.
Yeah,
That's a $500. That's $500 in gas driving.
yeah, I was going to say you need to get a Yugo or something.
They're traveling that much.
No, my most promising lead really goes back to my epiphany back in I'd say September of 2016. It really goes back to both those questions that Steve and Phil Bayman had posed. That really turned me into what I deem as a poem purist. So really, that was the biggest lead, and I haven't. I've kept my tail in front of that for a while now.
So let me address the issue. My, of course, biggest lead was the New Mexico Game and Fish fishing regulations. We had kind of an epiphanal moment. You got your epiphany thing there, Shelley?
Here we go.
Epiphanal moment this week and this last week, and so it set us off on a new direction. And I think what's interesting about the direction and perhaps this inflection point is that we probably have this season to really decide whether it's New Mexico or not, and whether or not we just have to move on and look at some of the other treasure states. Shelley, your hand is raised. You got a question for us? And what I'd like to do right now before we start the discussion about warm water salt, let's get through a lot of the questions in the chat room so we don't get behind.
Okay, sure. David Kramer wants to know, how do you believe the chest is hidden?
From anybody?
The panel.
All right, Rick, let's start with you. How do you believe the chest is hidden?
I'm starting to believe. I think it's under like some type of like hollow rock or like something that's hollowed out. It's got something in front of it,
Mike, how do you think the chest is hidden?
Yeah, the same. I think it's inside something. I mean, it may just be between 2 rocks in a cleft somehow. I think it's there. Once you find the blaze, I think it'll be right there. I hope. I mean, if I'm reading the poem the right way, and but I don't think it's buried. Like, I believe you said you don't need any tools.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember that?
I don't quite.
So, okay. So, yeah, I think it's kind of in plain sight, but it's covered somehow.
And Pam, how's the chest hidden?
Yeah, I would agree that it's covered somehow. Wasn't there something about that he mentioned something about turning over a log or something?
He advised, I remember one time, I think it was at Moby Dickens, just go up and start kicking over some logs. Was
So maybe something like that.
Yeah. Sean?
I think it's hidden very well.
Apparently, because nobody's found it yet, huh?
Right. Too well. He's the last line in the poem, he says, if you are brave and in the wood, and Forrest has been kind of in the wood a couple times in his life, if you understand the idiom.
Yeah.
Meaning, when he was shot down in Vietnam and he spent a night out in the Laotian jungle, and then also in dealing with cancer. So twice in his life he's been, to quote Roll Tide, he's been in a tight spot,
Right.
And he starts out the first stanza by saying, "As I have gone alone in there." So in there, to me, implies into something, into something that creates a boundary or something. So it could be in a tight spot. It could be in a crevice. Could be. I think there's a lot of talk on the forums about that. So to me, it's in could possibly be in some kind of crevice or hiding spot that long-term erosion really wouldn't affect. So
does anybody remember when Forrest said that the chest is in a place where there was enough room for him to sit up with that in his lap?
Yeah, I do. And wasn't that around Tony DeCopel's interview with him or something to
Yeah.
remember that Forrest, had said that he wanted to cast his body on top of the treasure at some point. I think that was in the Tony DeCopel interview.
And at the same time, he said it wasn't in a cave. So our perception, pretty much like everybody else, is that A, it's not buried underground, and B, it is in some sort of permanent rock niche that not only can you hide the treasure, but if he had chosen to, he could have placed himself in the treasure, hidden himself with the treasure. So, Shelley, any more questions before we get to Warm Waters Halt?
Yes, we have a question from Jan Kerb. It says, AGK, isn't there an elevation like, say, 8,000 feet or above in the Rockies where there are no warm waters, rivers, creeks, and streams? If so, it would help limit the search.
So, Sean, let me take that one last. Why don't you go first, Sean? Shelley,
I had this phone ringing over here, so I
okay,
completely
sorry.
missed it.
Restate the question, Shelley, would you please?
Jan Kerb is asking, is there an elevation at, say, 8,000 feet or above in the Rockies where there are no warm waters?
You know what? Actually, since you mentioned the Pecos Wilderness, Rick, let's start with you. Are there locations where there are no, quote, warm waters in the Rockies above 8,000 feet?
Actually, that one kind of has me stumped. I haven't ever investigated that part. I do know a lot of the geothermals though are coming, generated underground around that height though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any insight, Mike?
I don't know what the elevation is, and I have not looked at that. No, but even if that's true, between below 8,000 feet is such a big area. Does it really help or not?
Yeah,
I guess would be the question.
Sean Dodson, thoughts?
I guess it really goes to. It depends on what you think is more important. Do you think what Warm Waters Halt is, or where Warm Waters Halt is?
Yeah. And Pam, thoughts?
I don't know. I really don't know. I have never thought about that.
It's an interesting question because above 8,000 feet, you do get into the issue of, because geothermal is at the relatively lower altitudes. You may not have geothermal activity above 8,000 feet. I don't know, but I don't know necessarily that's true, whether that's true or not. And then secondly, the simple fact of the matter is that any place in the Rocky Mountains can generate water just based on the rains and the snowpacks. Water has that tendency, of course, to follow gravity, and so anytime any moisture comes together, it's going to form a stream or a rivulet, and you can find those at any altitude. I've been as high as 14,000 in the Rockies, Mount Elbert, and there are streams that come down during the spring runoff. You're going to find some streams at that altitude. So.
Yeah, but also I don't think you have to actually be on flat ground to hit groundwater either. I think you can hit groundwater in the side of a hill or side,
That's right. That's absolutely right. And that groundwater could be in a geothermal area because there is no predicting what's geothermal or not. I mean, it's a gambling to determine whether or not it's a geothermal area. Now, it tends to focus in particular areas. Sean,
and here in New Mexico, with a lot of the high mesas we have, the aquifers that can build up on top of the mesas and then seep through the sandstone over time was one of my interpretations of water high at one point.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been out in the Chama Canyon, you can see a lot of what they call desert varnish that comes off the side of the cliff, and that is really from the mineral content in the water that stains the side of the sandstones from the aquifers that push through the sandstone. So that was one of my interpretations of water high a couple years back.
And speaking of the Chama, we had several instances of coming upon pools of water that were the result of an indentation in a large stone surface that had formed the pool, and because of the amount of rainwater or whatever reason, it would pool there, and it had a pretty long life. What was really interesting is that when you stuck your finger in that water, if the sun was out, it absorbed heat like the dickens. So, Shelley, you got a question for us?
I do. Chris Thor from the Hint of Riches says, AGK, have any of you Let's see. Have any of you thought of partnering up with others hardcore in hunting for the chest?
Sean?
Have I thought of partnering with somebody else as far as hardcore going after the treasure? No, I really haven't. I feel that I'm capable enough of trying to figure this out on my own. And I think Forrest Fenn has said at one point in time, it is a thrill in doing it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It is a thrill in figuring this out. And it's hard enough to get in tune with your own spouse on what you think is going on, let alone trying to bring another person in.
Yeah.
I mean, you just see it on the forums. You could throw out an idea, and boy, you'll get sharks attack you. Pretty quickly. So trying to find somebody that you're like-minded with, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to even find somebody to be like-minded with, because then you two would be a bunch of bobbleheads and you may never get a chance to adjust. So I think sometimes being in the forums and getting people to debate with you and throw out other ideas is healthy, even when it is heated sometimes. So finding a search partner, I think, like I said, I think you and Shelley balance each other out pretty well, and that's good. So
Thank God. Pam, you've got a partner, but
do.
have you guys ever thought about incorporating another person in your partnership?
No, we do fine.
Yeah. Shelley, you happy with the partnership?
Yeah, you, me, and Kevin.
Yeah, that's how it is.
I
I mean, it was,
doesn't get any better than that.
yeah. Shelley, when Shelley asked about forming starting the search again, it became a partnership. But along with Shelley came her husband, Kevin. And he's a very wise individual. I love having him around. Plus, he's funny. He makes me laugh. Mike, have you ever thought about partnerships?
Well, I've got two partners, my sons, Chris and Eric. And
That's
if the chest is not found in the next 5 years, we are going to make a trip. But I've got a lot of requests of people that want to partner up, mostly people that know where it is, but they can't get out there. They want me to go find it.
Yeah.
And while I may be open to that, I tell them, you got to convince me you're right. And so far, I haven't found that solution that makes me jump in the car and go.
Rick, it sounds like you've incorporated your family into your searches, but have you thought about a partnership with anyone?
Well, I tried it several years ago, and the very first time, very first time I told somebody something, man, they were gone and never heard from them again. It's sorry.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with finding a partner. I've thought about it here just because of the expenses and stuff, but it'd have to be somebody that's in New Mexico that I trust.
Yeah, yeah. I think that would be the ideal situation, would be to have a partner that you could just send your solutions to. They would look and come back with some sort of positive or negative resolution. And if they did find the treasure, they wouldn't head for the mountains
Yeah.
in South America.
That's the hardest part,
Yeah.
is disclosing all your information
Right.
to somebody, and then, they're gone.
Yeah. All right. We promised our audience that we would spend some time with Warm Waters Halt. So let's go around the horn here. Rick, what's your best definition of Warm Waters Halt? Where Warm Waters Halt?
I actually hot spring. Like I said, I believe it's actually where the warm waters run into cold waters, and
make that transition from the hot springs into the cool waters, forming the warm waters.
yeah. And actually, what I believe, I told you, like I believe I found what I think's a map, and this map actually tells me this hot spring in New Mexico. That's why I'm so set on its map, because when you read it with the poem, it's saying go to this spot.
Okay, so now you've said that a couple of times now, and I don't want to be intrusive, but the map that you keep describing that you found, is this something that you found online, or in a ciphered form in the book? Where does this map of yours, and again, you don't have to answer this question, but where does this map you keep describing come from?
Well, you can pretty much find it anywhere. You can find it online, but it's made by Forrest, though.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's made by Forrest. He made it. So.
Well,
One of his other books, maybe?
Huh?
One of his other books, maybe?
I don't want to go into
okay,
it.
all right. Yeah, we don't want to have. We don't want to ask you too much. But so let me ask it another way. The map you're talking about that you keep describing as you found this map is, and you can just nod your head, is not the map that's in the back of Too Far to Walk. It is not
No.
that map. Is that correct?
No,
What
it's not
page is
that
it
map.
on?
Oh, okay. All right. What page? Find me the map. Find me the map.
No, it's
All
not
right,
that
let's
map.
pop across me right here. Sean Dodson, what's your best definition of warm waters?
Well, it goes to the ongoing argument right now of what is the first clue. What is your interpretation of the first clue? Let me ask you back to you, Toby. What do you believe is the first clue?
So, and I think it's interesting the way that you asked that question, because what I've recently tried to do is not make the distinction about where the clue is, just it's the first clue and the last clue, not clue number 1 and clue number 9. The first clue with any import to me is begin at where warm waters halt. Now, I know you're exploring other avenues in the poem, so warm waters halt may not be as important to you. There may be another clue that precedes that you're more comfortable with, and you don't. Warm waters halt is not where you're investing your where do I start from time. So let me throw it back to you. Where are you investing the research and where to start your search?
Well, to me, it goes back again to where my epiphany, and my search really came from, and that is understanding that, to me, it was both Steve and Phil Bayman who were oversimplifying the clue. Mm-hmm. And if you believe or you subscribe to the idea, like I do, that each sentence is a clue, so 9 sentences are 9 clues, then the whole clue, if you want to call it the first clue, is begin at where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, mm-hmm. not far, but too far to walk. Mm-hmm. That is the whole clue. So you have to look at that whole clue in the entire context. You can't do what I believe Phil Bayman and Steve were doing, which was oversimplify that clue by just saying begin at where warm waters halt.
And you're saying that because that's an entire begin at where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, not far but too far to walk, because that's one sentence. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. That is a complete sentence. And what I believe Forrest was telling both Steve and Phil Bayman is that Steve was leaving out some ingredients. So what ingredients was Steve leaving out? And if Phil Bayman was oversimplifying the clue, what does he mean by oversimplify? And mm-hmm. oversimplify is to simplify something so much as to distort its impression. So Phil Bayman was oversimplifying the clue because he was not completing the entire clue, which is that incomplete sentence. So he was oversimplifying it.
Let me go on to Pam and get her. Pam, in the context of what Sean just said, and assuming that warm waters halt may be your first clue, what are you looking for when it comes to where warm waters halt?
I agree with Rick that it's probably hot spring, something geothermal, something like that. But I can imagine that there's a lot of people there typing in that Forrest Fenn map online right now, trying to find it.
Forrest Fenn. How do I Google that map thing?
Yeah.
So, Rick, let me go back. And, Sean has proposed something really, really interesting. And I didn't ask this question of you earlier, but when you look at the poem, are you looking at the 9 clues beginning where is your first clue? How do you structure the poem in the context of clues? We should have asked you that earlier.
Well, again, I think each sentence is a clue.
You know what, Sean? I'm sorry.
Did you mean to talk it to me, or?
I meant Rick. I'm sorry. If I said Sean, I apologize. Rick, so how do you see the poem? 9 clues beginning with where warm waters halt, 9 sentences. How does it work or is it even more complex for you?
I'm pretty much like Sean. I'm a poem purist. I believe it's all 9 sentences. I believe it goes 2 different directions, though.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the way everybody else is searching and the way I originally searched, it took me one place. But when I figured out how to get out of it, it took me another place.
Interesting. So before we get into a couple more questions, just in case, do you want to give us a link to that map that you've been talking about? Shelly, you got any more questions
www.blm.com.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Shelly, more questions?
Well, we have 2 more super chats.
Oh, nice.
One from X Sarbon, and he didn't ask a question, but we just want to say hi and thank you.
Well, I should
And-
may I take a moment to just to mention that Sarbon, and I'm not going to tell you his real name. You'll have to find that out because he has a YouTube channel. Sarbon is going to be our next week's guest. So thank you for that, and you didn't have to pay us to be next week's guest. So.
And the other super chat is from Chris Johnson. And Chris says, thanks for the good work you do. I think the panel format is a great idea. Excellent panel tonight.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I do also want to mention that earlier in the evening, we got a question from Chris Thor. Chris runs the Hint of Riches forum. And Chris, I don't remember the exact URL, but make sure that before you leave the chat room tonight, you enter the URL for your forum so other people can visit your forum. I'd appreciate that. So, all right. And do you have any questions, Shel?
I do. I just have to find them again. Sorry.
Sorry, my fault.
Here we go. Jason Winters or Jays Winters. Question for Illinois Ghost. How did you get so familiar with Forrest Fenn? It sounds like you guys are good friends.
Not really. I mean, I went to the book signings. I met him at a book signing, but I email him a lot. I notice a lot of people say that he doesn't email back, but a lot of times I'll email him. I'll get a response like 5-10 minutes. It's surprising, but a lot of times I don't talk about treasure when I email him. I tell him, hey, I'm doing this or I'm doing that, but I don't like pry for questions about the treasure, ask questions. Hey, am I doing this right? Can I get a yes or a no? Anything like that. But
Were you at the 2013 Moby Dickens book signing?
no, I was at the La Fonda Hotel book signing. I had actually met a bunch of the searchers there, but that's pretty much the first book signing I went to. I've been out there during every Fenbury. It's just I spend all my time searching. I try to, I don't ever make it to Fenbury.
So when you come to New Mexico, if you're searching in the Pecos, it's likely that your kind of home base is Santa Fe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, Shelley and I are an hour's drive away from Santa Fe, so we hope that the next time you come out that you'll give us a call and we'll get together for lunch or let me treat you to lunch and we'll talk searching.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to.
Yeah. And that's true for any of you guys. If you ever get within, Santa Fe distance from Albuquerque, let us know and we'll have coffee. And maybe it'll give Mike an excuse to actually get out of Las Vegas and quit gambling and come search.
That would be nice to take.
I was actually at the La Fonda book signing and I talked to Forrest. He signed my book and everything. And then I stayed away from him pretty much all night, but he grabbed a chair, and every time he'd start walking toward me, dragging his chair like he's coming over to talk to me, and somebody grab his arm, he'd turn around and sit in his chair. And then he'd get up, he'd start dragging his chair, and somebody'd grab his arm, he'd turn around and sit in his chair. Never made it to me, but.
We did the Loretto book signing, Shelley and I. And then, of course, I was at the Collected Works in October 2013, and I shot the Moby Dickens in November 2013. So, wait a minute. I had one more question for Rick, or did I get through it? All right, Shelley, let's go back to your questions.
Okay, this is from one of our moderators, Joel Lewicki. It's for the panel, and it pertains to where warm waters halt. And his question is, what one thing do you primarily use to attempt to determine where warm waters halt?
Pam, let's start with you on this one. What one thing do you use?
Probably maps is my best answer to that. We do a lot of maps, Google, and searching the areas that way. Because we are so far away from the search area, we're not able to go right directly. So when we plan our trips, we do maps, and then we know where we're going to go look for the warm water.
And that's part of that planning process. You don't want to leave home. You want to stay home and play canasta if you don't have a good sense of where you're going. Rick, what do you use? You've done a lot of planning and looking for warm water salt. What do you use?
Originally to find where I'm at now, or?
No, just kind of when you're planning a search and looking for your next warm waters halt, if that exists. Where do you start in terms of research and?
Originally I was Google Earth every day, and then like I said, I got where I'm at now. I put boots on the ground, and I started from what I believe is the beginning, and I drove it, and that's where I ended up. I didn't even know it was there. I didn't even know this place was there. I ended up there. I didn't know it was there.
Well, honestly, I'm envious. I love Pecos. It's one of my favorite fishing spots. I haven't considered it for part of Fenn's treasure, but maybe I should just to get up there some more. Sean Dodson, what do you use? What kind of research material do you use to get to your warm water salt or your first clue?
Well, I've had that. I've had that. What I believe to be nailed down, pinned down, however you want to do it with certainty, since October, September of 2016. So I haven't had a need to go back to that. But what I basically used to determine that was just the words in the poem.
Yeah. And Mike?
I go back to what Forrest Fenn has said about the first clue, and just a couple of things to remind everybody, because I'm sure everybody remembers. But on a Richard Eads interview, he said finding the treasure chest is not something someone's going to do on a spring break or a Sunday afternoon picnic. Richard Eads says it's going to take some long, concerted research and effort. And Forrest Fenn says, well, it doesn't take, and then he pauses and he says, you just have to think the right things. You have to think the right things. There's something going on with warm waters than what people think, and in my opinion. He's also said, there was another question, can hunters really get to the treasure location with just a good map, the poem, and a decent knowledge of words? And Forrest Fenn's response was, if you change the last word to geography, my answer would be yes. Another time he said a comprehensive knowledge of geography of the Rocky Mountains would help. So, and now that you brought up the fishing regulations, it kind of came back into my mind. I'm trying to think, does that relate to those comments that he made relate to the fishing regulations? So I'm kind of going back and forth. But for me, I go back to things Forrest Fenn.
Yeah, but who has more knowledge of geography than a geographer?
Right. So
True.
Our favorite tools are the like everybody else. I don't think we're different in this way. Are the poem, the book, my online research. I use GMAP4 because it has layers, and I like the idea of layers, and it has a drawing tool that you can use for measurement. And then, as you probably already know about us, I'm a BLM map fanatic. And that's for two reasons. Number one, I can pull geographic coordinates off those maps, and it gives me it helps me distinguish between the types of property. So GMAP4 and BLM maps, but before that, the book and the poem. Okay, Shelley, we're going to start. How close am I? We're going to start wrapping up in a couple of minutes, but let's see if we can take some more questions from the room before we skate out of here.
All right. Another one from one of our moderators. We have a super chat from Byron Eagle. And
Brian,
the question
thank you.
the question is, any chance you know where to find that other Forrest Fenn map?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like Rick is going to give it up. You're going to have to do some research, but
Age 132.
yeah, apparently it's findable. He said you could find it if you looked hard enough. So I'm thinking we won't have to wait for Forrest to leave his house and
And
shake him
I
down.
have
Go ahead.
I think you guys already talked about this, but Ron Wendland asked, wouldn't the hiding spot need to be large enough to house Joe's bones? I don't know who Joe is.
Oh, Mummy Joe out of Mummy Joe in out of Yellowstone Park is the only thing I can think of. Well, I think it was Sean that said was it Sean that said that at some point. No, Rick had said that at some point Fenn said he was going to die with the treasure in his lap. So it'd have to be at least as big as that. Questions?
Jay Miller says to the panel, does anyone know of where a hot spring may freeze over?
I do, but it's not an answer to this. Iceland, that happens in Iceland and Greenland. I have photographs of them. But does anybody know any place in the Rocky Mountains where that could happen, or has seen it happen? I want to make sure. Yeah, I don't think it. To the best of my knowledge, it doesn't happen in the Rockies.
All right. I have a question from JL to the panel. Do you think if Do you think Forrest Fenn planted a pinyon tree, that could be ablaze and possibly hiding the chest from 10 plus years of growth?
Rick, pinyon tree.
I don't think I think it's hidden near a pinyon tree. Also, I think there's a weeping willow somewhere involved in it
Wow.
too, which I've actually got a weeping willow in my spot too. So I actually believe that that's in there too.
That's an interesting combination, weeping willow and pinyon tree in the Rocky Mountains. That's a rare spot. Where is it?
Is it
On that map he keeps talking about. Come on, Toby.
Apparently, yeah. So, Shelley, help me with that question again. I want everybody else to take a shot at it.
From David Kramer?
Yeah.
Sorry. That was a different one. That was the next question.
Oh, okay.
This one was from JL.
Yeah.
And
thought
he
it was-
wanted to know, do you think that Forrest Fenn planted a pinyon tree, that could be ablaze and possibly hiding the chest from 10 plus years of growth?
Pam, what do you think?
No,
No.
I don't think so.
Mike?
I think it's an interesting idea. It's possible. I mean, he could have done anything he wanted to. He considers it his spot alone, so it's
Yeah,
possible.
it doesn't actually take much to plant a pinyon tree because you can just pick up any of the things they drop and replant it. Sean, what do you think?
Well, again, I go back to erosion, and a lot of the searches I've gone on, and I think others who've been on searches on the ground have seen plenty of trees that have been uprooted that are out there. So I would think that, if it was a tree, and even if it was 100 years down the road and it was knocked over or eroded away for whatever reason, it could, ruin his plans for what he's done. I think why there is, probably pinyon trees and pine trees and other sage and stuff that's in the search area where you would find the treasure, like he says, I don't see it as being under a tree in that sense, but anything is possible.
Anything is possible, right?
Yeah.
I do have a wild thought about that though.
Go ahead, Rick.
I don't know if you've seen them before. They got things called grave planters. They're basically an urn for ashes, but they grow plants out the top of them. I don't know if you can get one. He could have got one big enough to put the chest in.
Put the chest in
on
and
it. Yeah,
that's it.
just plant it.
And it would have some. It would have some life to it. Shelley, I think. Give us one more question, and then I'll start wrapping up.
Okay. Well, we just got another super chat from Paul Ammons.
All right, let's
an
take that with a
additional
question.
$20.
Thank you. Paul.
It says, Chris, do you know the Story family? And I'm not sure who Chris is.
Oh, that might be Chris Thor from. How's it spelled?
With a C.
Oh no.
So I'm not quite sure what that's about.
Well, let's ask the panel. Does anybody know the Story family? No. Okay, just making sure. All right. Well, we got to wrap it up. So before we go, I'd like to have each of the panelists tell you where you can find them on the internet and what assets they have. Rick, let's start with you.
Yeah, you can find me at it's Ghost Adventures is the website. It's at illinoisghost.wordpress.com. I do have a YouTube, but I don't really. All the videos are set to private on there. I have a hard time, I think they give too much away when I show the videos.
Well, they don't
But
have
I'm
to
going
be
to be I'm going to be changing. I'm going to be.
Good. We believe that a lot of this community is going to be built on YouTube, so we'd love to see you. We'd love to see you build a YouTube channel out, and you can do it without giving away too much. But make a video about that map, would you? So, hey, Sean, where can we? Where can we find you?
Again, Sean Dotson. You can find me on the forums as Sean NM, and you can catch me on YouTube at my channel called The Flip Side of the Forrest Fenn Treasure Hunt. So I like to tell people you can catch me on the flip side.
Nice, very good. Pam, where can we find you?
Pam Shotman. I'm Ramblin' Pam on YouTube.
And how many videos do you have now?
It's in the 50s now.
Oh, great. And by the way, thank you very much for making those little promotional videos that you make when you promote our panels. We really appreciate that.
You're
Mike,
welcome.
where can folks find you?
Kalazar's on YouTube, and real quick,
Yeah.
just for you, Toby, I emailed Forrest Fenn today. I emailed him the question, do you consider the New Mexico fishing regulation map specialized knowledge? And he emailed me back in 15 minutes. I want you to know it's an inside joke, everybody. And his answer is, I don't know, Mike. Sorry. So I don't know how he can not know an opinion. He won't answer the question.
The man makes
But
me crazy.
Kalazar's on YouTube.
All right, Kalazar. Shelley?
Okay, so you can find me at www.thesofterside.me. And I did want to send out thank yous to everybody this evening. We got one more super chat tonight from John Bobbitt. So we have super chats from X Sardin, Brian Eagle, Paul Ammons, JL, Chris Johnson, another one from Paul Ammons and John Bobbitt. And I wanted to send out a special thank you to Jason Eunice, Toby's oldest son. He's been in the chat tonight helping answer our questions from our viewers. So we really appreciate that. There are a couple of more questions that we didn't get to tonight, and I'll make sure that Toby answers those in the comments.
Okay, that's the
Great
best
job,
way
Shelley.
that we
Great
could do. Jason Eunice, 5 guys on Friday, brother. I'll pay you back. How's that? Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. I want to say thanks to each of our panel members, Sean Dodson, Pam Shopman, Mike Cowling. I want to especially say thank you to Rick for joining us tonight. And we've invited Rick to join us on other panels when we have other guests. Of course, I want to thank my angelic partner, Shelley Carney, for performing the producer's responsibilities tonight. I'd like to thank our moderators for doing such a great job, not only moderating, but answering some of those questions that they probably heard us answer before. It's a really, really big help. And of course, I'd like to thank the folks that click that super chat button to help us move this project forward. And then, of course, I'd like to thank all of you that were in the chat tonight. We're really grateful that you show up for these events. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time for Forrest Fenn Book Club, The Thrill of the Chase, Chapter 9, 8. Help me out, Shelley.
8. We're on 8.
And what is
Surviving Myself.
Surviving Myself. We'll talk about that, and we'll drink some wine. And the wine that we'll be drinking, we got from the Black Mesa Winery as we came back from our trip up north this weekend. So,
yes.
Again, thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Rick, again, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you again, I'm sure. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Take care, and we hope to see you tomorrow.